indeed, it was dramatic because we obviously, the customer was of course extremely upset about this, for all the right reasons. And our role was then to say, okay, well, we need to investigate and truly dig deep into why, using the 5 whys, trying to, understand why could something like this go wrong. And it really boiled down to people, with all the best intentions, people not having been trained and just not understanding the criticality of their actions and just thinking they were doing the best and actually realizing that actually it caused, a multi-million-dollar damage.
Hello. Today I'm presenting the second episode of our Call Secret podcast, and I'm very pleased to have with us Nina. Hello, Nina.
Hi, Miguel. Nice to be here.
After the first episode with Fabian, we were thinking, okay, how can we keep on the level of having interesting speakers with us? And I think we will achieve that with that conversation with Nina. We want to change a bit the format, maybe having more an interactive conversation. Also because I've been working together with Fabian for quite some months now, and I know much less about you, Nina. So it's going to be also a discovery for me to know more about your background, experiences, and so on. And hopefully I can bring also some value into the table, but for sure, let's say you are the most important person on this session today. So let's start. Nina, can you please summarize in a few sentences who is Nina Heinz?
Okay, so I'll start with the personal aspect. So I am originally German, but if you look at my desk, I have an Eiffel Tower, which is because I'm actually based in Paris, and I've been living in France now for over 20 years. My husband is French. So we live here with our 2 children. I actually studied in the US and then came to Paris. I started as a trainee working with Lufthansa Cargo. So immediately fell in love with the whole air cargo space, and also had my first steps in being a key account manager for some large pharmaceutical accounts for the carrier. So really the initial steps in cold chain, and it's never left me. So I've remained in that space ever since. So it's been over 20 years. I was a founding member of Life Connects, which is a joint venture between Danzas AI and Lufthansa Cargo, all about end-to-end temperature control transportation for the life sciences industry. Was more involved there in the quality and compliance aspect of the business, as well as also supplier management and operations. So managing that whole network, ensuring that everybody was compliant to the customer requirements. I did that for over 12 years. It was a very exciting time, especially very successful also in terms of then being purchased 100% by DHL Global Forwarding. So I like to say I moved from one yellow to another yellow. And after then many years, let's say, of heavily focusing on the air cargo career, I moved into the blue world and joined Maersk, so more from an ocean perspective. And there I was responsible for the cold chain and lead logistics products, driving the growth there, including, of course, also the growth of the pharmaceutical products, but as well also other perishable sectors, and really driving the product development, growing the team, and leading the transformation in that sector. So that's been my career and my path. I left Maersk in June last year, took some time off, and I'm now looking for my new adventure and am transitioning.
Wow, amazing background, Nina. Hopefully we can benefit and take, I want to make it as interactive as possible. So trying to make it productive. And at the end of this session, we can have some takeaways that we can apply to our daily life.
Perfect.
So maybe out of my curiosity, which was let's say the main challenge, or which are the major challenges that you face when you transition from the air to the sea sector?
That's a good question. So I think for me, coming from a very strong background in air cargo, you have certain prejudices maybe when you come into the ocean business. And I think the fact that I worked in that sector of the business really helped me sort of demystify some of the myths maybe that exist around sea freight, especially when it comes to life sciences products. So I think historically, air freight has been seen as fast, reliable, but expensive, to sum it
Mm-hmm.
up in a few words. And the ocean has had a little bit of that misconception of saying, well, it's cheaper, but it's not as reliable. And actually being able to look behind the scenes, I've realized actually that it is an extremely reliable service, that there's been a lot of interesting developments also from a life sciences perspective to ensure compliance. And that actually, I think the two are very complementary of each other. So I think it's very much up to life sciences customers to analyze their supply chain and look into where does it make the most sense for them to use air cargo, where does it make sense for them to use more ocean. And I think in a world where we have a lot of geopolitical disturbances, there's a lot of things going on at the moment. Resilience is a key word. And I think resilience through this sort of, modal mix, finding that right modal mix, I think, you can really achieve resilience. And I think we've come a long way looking back at my career about, where we are from an ocean perspective as well as from an air perspective, and really providing temperature control for life sciences shipments. So that was for me sort of an awakening moment where I really said, wow, okay, we have come a long way. And the both have, their role to play.
Yeah, absolutely. And also from my experience, I mean now because of my role at Truecaller, we are in
Hmm.
conversation with a lot of different pharma companies, and most of them tell us that they are trying to transition from air to the sea shipments because of the volumes and trying to benefit. Basically, the concept is sea shipments are not as fast as the air.
Hmm.
That's an
Hmm.
obvious. But also, they want to, instead of investing in big storage facilities, they can consider the sea shipment as part of their
Hmm.
in-transit stock. So
Of course.
basically, instead of having a full warehouse, plenty of medicines or pharma products, their products are on the way to the
Hmm.
before reaching the final destination. So basically, they have a moving warehouse while they are doing all the different quality releases and approvals and validation and so on. So I found it, I mean, uh, that's a very clever way of optimizing and coming back to the mix that you mentioned. Fast is not always the best.
Right. No, absolutely. So I think it depends. It depends on your product, right? So it depends on the temperature range, but also the value of your product. It depends on the speed to market that you're trying to achieve. So even looking at a product life cycle perspective, there may be even within the same product, times in that life cycle of the product where you really need speed to market and you need that flexibility to be able to adapt depending on where you want to send your product because you have a very short time period to benefit from those key moments when you're launching a new product. But there may be then in the later phase of a product, you actually have a very constant market demand and you know exactly that you have large volumes and it's on a very regular basis. And that allows you then, of course, to say, okay, maybe I want to shift to ocean, to your point as well, and using that time on the sea to be able to drive other elements. So I think indeed the both play a critical role, and I think that they're essential. It's from a supply chain management perspective that it's important that people understand what criteria to look into when making that decision, and really driving that. But I think the element of compliance there is always, of course, key. And I think that's an area where both sectors have recognized one, the importance for the patient to ensure that regular compliance always comes first, and two, of course, the fact that it's a growing sector, so it's a worthwhile to make investments in this niche market because it's one that will continue to grow and evolve.
Yeah. And well, having exact figures about the growth of the market is not so easy.
Mm.
It depends on the different sources that we are
Yeah.
checking. But well, from the latest statements, we've seen that more than 30% of the medicines approved by the FDA are temperature sensitive
Mm.
products, and that's an ongoing. That's there is a potential increase, so it's a trend that it's going on. I think that there was a big change, or in terms of mentality, especially after the COVID crisis, when people really realized, well, for people in the sector, maybe not that much, but people,
Mm,
let's say, for the vast majority of the
mm.
population, they realize, okay, medicines need to be under control, and it's very
Yeah,
crucial. And
yeah.
yeah,
I had the same feeling. So I used to, people, ask you, so what do you do? Right. And you have to explain to them what you do. And I used to joke around and say, oh, I send drugs around the world. And it always kind of, triggered a bit of a smile. But after COVID, people were like, now I really understand what you do. And I kind of said, yeah, but we've been doing this for years. So I think it was more of maybe a public awareness that rose in terms of people understanding that, bringing the vaccines to the patient also requires a cold chain in terms of transportation, supply chain management. But I think for many companies that were heavily involved, they'd been doing it for years. So the experience was definitely already there, not at that scale necessarily. And then, of course, also not in terms of the stakeholders who were involved. So during the COVID period, you definitely had more government involvement, right,
mhm,
to really drive this forward at a massive scale. But yes, to your point, I think it definitely raised, the public awareness,
awareness, yeah.
and understanding, and maybe appreciation also for the importance of all the folks that are involved, because it was really a huge team effort, and you had people around the world that were dedicated to making this work. But it always kind of brings in back to why we're doing this, and I think that's also one of the reasons why I've always enjoyed working in the life sciences industry, is just because there is sort of that higher noble cause that you're working for. You always know that there is a patient there waiting for the product, and that patient can, it could be yourself, it could be your loved ones, it could be a friend, a family member, a pet. There's always somebody waiting for that product. So it gives your work a different meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not about process optimization, gaining more money, but there is actually a patient behind the whole
Yep.
story who is benefiting from that. And actually, one of our messages is that today more than $35 billion are wasted due to excursions on incorrect consideration of the temperature control on the cold
Yep.
chain management. So,
And that's massive, right? Right. And I
and
think it's nice to see how each one of us plays a role. And that was a lot of what we did as well in the initial phases in terms of driving awareness at all levels of the organization and all parts of the organization, because everybody has their part to play. And I remember a story where there was an active container manufacturer, and they actually printed faces of pictures of patients on their containers. And when these containers were traveling around the world, the message was, these are the people that are receiving the medicines that are in these containers. And the ground handlers really reacted to this, because they said, wow, it gives more meaning to what I'm doing. And it gives me that, that need for providing extra care and extra attention to these shipments, because it couldn't it could be my daughter, it could be my brother, it could be my mother. So I think that kind of general awareness at all levels of the organization is really key in training and making sure that people are aware of the work they're doing and the impact. Help support that.
Absolutely. So it's not only about waste reduction and process
Mm,
optimization, but also taking into consideration that there is a patient at the end of the day that will benefit for getting those medicines. Absolutely.
exactly. Yeah.
And how do you see? I mean, you mentioned you had more than 20 years working in the life science sector
Mhm.
on different companies. How have you seen the evolution in terms of we can look at the evolution from different perspectives.
Yeah.
From a technological perspective, also from a compliance and regulatory perspective.
Hmm.
Let's focus on those two first, and
Okay.
if you can guide us through a bit about which has been the main challenges or main uh, changes that you have seen along your experience in those two and
Hmm.
from those two angles.
So I think from a regulatory compliance perspective, for me, the big challenge remains, as is the complexity of the regulatory landscape, and the fact that indeed, depending on where you are in the world, regulations may differ, whether you're working with Anvisa in Brazil or the FDA in the US, or, the European Medicines Agency in Europe, just as examples. There is some variety there. However, we've also seen a lot of progress in terms of driving collaboration amongst stakeholders to drive some form of standardization and harmonization. If you look at the air freight space as a very good example, I did a lot of audits at airports around the world, and I've seen so many different labels in terms of the temperature ranges. So they
Mhm.
range from penguins to snowflakes to all these boxes that the ground handlers receive at the airport, and it says keep cold, or and it has got a penguin on it. Fine, okay, what does that mean, right? So
It's a zoo.
right, I mean it's okay. Um, and so one of the initiatives was also then for the airlines and the ground handlers and the airports to work together under the leadership also of IATA to say, okay, let's come up with a common label. And that common label is the same for everybody, and everybody is trained on that common label, and everybody understands what that label means in terms of time and temperature requirements for that shipment. So it took a lot of discussions and a lot of meetings, but it's that sort of one label now that is globally, worldwide, everywhere recognized. No matter what language you speak, no matter what part of the world you're in, when you see that label, you know what to do, right? So that is comes with sort of awareness, standardization, and harmonization,
But
and
that
so that for me was really important.
but that IATA label is only applicable or only mandatory for air shipments, correct?
Correct. Yes, it's only for air shipments.
So now we live in a world like, I mean, most of the logistics is multimodal. So
Yep.
it's by road, by air, and a mix of it.
Hmm.
Train is playing a more important role since the last few years. Wouldn't it make sense to have kind of an standardized, which is independent on the mode of transport?
Sure. No, absolutely. And I think there's even an element for me of being a patient myself, to be actually receiving a product and knowing, right, that product has reached my doorstep in the right condition. And I think in terms of evolution, I mean, if you look at the technology perspective of it now, if you look at it from a patient perspective, patients are more and more wanting to take control of
Mhm.
their own health, whether it be using apps on the phone or whether it being, getting information on the web about, or even consulting with your doctor, over the phone in a video conference. But these are kind of elements where the patient wants to take control. So I think it's even, I would take it a step further and say multimodal is great, but it's actually the patient that wants to know. Did this
Mhm.
vaccine that I'm going to have injected in me, or is this insulin that I'm going to use, right? Has it been kept at the right temperatures throughout the supply chain? And that's, I think, where data also plays a key role. So having the label is one thing because it gives instructions, but then having the proof and the data that it was actually managed in that way is sort of the important step, right? And driving that technology and that innovation, I think for me is key. So if I was a patient, I would love to be able to say, I know exactly how that product
That
was
insulin that I'm
transported.
taking is in perfect condition,
Exactly.
and I can see all the
Exactly.
different steps. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh, I wanted to ask you um, because we have the let's say the standardization in terms of labeling for the
Hmm.
air shipment, and now you're mentioning okay, having full control of the all the different data points. It's let's say the direction that we're gonna go, but at some point the reality is that the pharmaceutical supply chain and the pharmaceutical distribution is quite complex. So there are different players
Mm. Yep.
on the scene, like multiple 3PLs, 4PLs, carrier, forwarding agents,
Yep.
unbelievable.
Mm.
And each of them, they have their own systems in place, their own way to name the product and so on. So uh, in order to achieve the goal of empowering the final patient to keep track of all the different data points,
Hmm.
don't you think that there is a gap in terms of data collaboration between all the different parties in the supply chain?
Yeah, there definitely is. I mean, there's so many different data points. It's become a data swamp, and you could say the same thing even in terms of the platforms or the devices that are used. There's so much out there that it's very hard to kind of navigate through all these different elements. I think having that neutrality would be ideal so that companies can continue to use maybe their own platforms or their own devices or their own ways of working, because sometimes there's very good reasons for why certain ways of working have been put in place. Sometimes maybe they need to change, right? But to have kind of that layer maybe of neutrality, to collect all of that data and to make sense of that data. And I think that's the essence, is getting that knowledge from the data. Otherwise, it's just a big data swamp, and nobody wants to try to swim through that sea and try to find out what to do. Because in essence, what you're trying to do is to say, how can this data help me improve resilience, as an example, or cost efficiencies or speed, right? There's different elements, different questions that you want to answer, different responses that you want to find by using that data. So I think having sort of that kind of neutral angle there is extremely important. And that's also what we're hearing from a lot of life sciences customers who may even be working with multiple 3PL, 4PL providers or carriers or ground handlers moving around the world with different airlines, but also ocean carriers, trucking providers. So like you said, the complexity of the supply chain makes it very challenging to manage. But having sort of that neutrality, I think, would be really, really valuable.
Wow, Nina. I mean, I could have not described it before, and this is actually you made basically the pitch of Truecaller as a data lake of my
Okay,
company. I could not have said any.
but it's
I
so
can.
true. It's so true. I mean, that's what everybody's sort of waiting for, right? Is to have sort of that neutral element that people can, and really use and make the most of. So I think that's important.
Talking about the technology,
Mhm.
in the last few days and weeks, there is a new ban that actually impacts quite heavily on the stock.
Okay.
So, question is, have you tried already DeepSeek, the new AI agent?
I have not. So I've learned to use ChatGPT thanks to my two kids who are 15 and 17, who are avid users. I have not yet used the other ones out there, so DeepSeek as well. I have to say I'm a little cautious, but more for, I guess, my own personal political convictions than for anything else.
Uh-huh.
But it's interesting to see, because it's indeed an area where I think it's sort of the next revolution for me that's coming up. And, if I could take a glimpse into where we're going to be in, even a few years from now, it'd be interesting to see what kind of use cases can come out of this. There's some danger. So I think whenever something new comes, people are always a bit scared. Change is always scary. But I'm an optimist by nature, so I always feel like, well, great, let's use it. How can we make the most of some of this, and help us, as an example, navigate through some of this data that we're desperately trying to come to terms with. So I think that there's definitely some good use cases for it.
Absolutely, and I'm really
Have you
convinced.
used it?
Yes, I'm trying. I'm a nerd, Nina. I'm a nerd, so I'm trying every new
Good,
tool
good.
that
So
I see
then
in the
you'll have to
market.
fill us in
I
and
try them
say if
all.
it's
I actually
good.
I have to limit myself not to spend so much time
Wow.
trying new stuff,
Okay.
because otherwise I don't focus on what I should do. But okay, no, but absolutely, and at some point I feel that either ChatGPT, DeepSeek, or the
Mm,
models from Meta and so on, at some point they will become like a commodity that
yeah.
anyone can use it, and the real added value will be on what you build on top of them, like
Oh, okay.
being very vertical or being specific to solve a certain
Mhm.
problem. Because at the end, the AI
So you're already
technology,
in the next step. You're already beyond. You're already thinking. So where do
uh,
you see the use cases? Do you see any use cases for life
for,
sciences logistics?
yeah, for instance, one of the pain points that you can confirm if that was or
Yeah.
not is about, in terms of temperature control logistics, is not about the logistic itself, which can also be a challenge,
Mm,
but also about the calibration of the devices.
yeah.
Um, if I The calibration, according to the pharmaceutical regulation, the devices needs to be calibrated once per year.
Correct.
But okay, I mean, either it's not so easy, and that, let's say, the regulation, but it's not the same if we are shipping something at 228, if it's at -70. It also impacts on the performance of the tracker itself. So the calibration frequency may also differ depending on the transport conditions that this tracker has been used for. So I've been in contact with a research group here in Barcelona who are developing an AI algorithm to detect exactly when the device needs to be recalibrated according to the different measures of the different type of shipment that has been used for.
Nice. Yeah, so that would definitely we definitely see a lot of value in that as well. Because the whole topic even of data loggers, I think, is one to explore to see if we can't, achieve greater efficiency from that perspective as well, right? In terms of also reducing maybe the cost, but also reducing the waste with those data loggers equally. So using AI there, I think, would indeed be really valuable. Yep.
Yeah, and now there is a European directive, I think. I'm not very good on the legal framework that they have to admit, where basically pharma companies are accountable and responsible for the waste that they generated.
Mm-hmm.
And well, that's kind of reasonable, let's say. But it includes into the waste generation the different systems that they use in terms for tracking the temperature. Here, for instance, the data loggers.
Mm-hmm.
Today, more than 70% of the data loggers are single use. So if we are
Yep.
shipping something to whatever part of the world, that's left there. So how do you see this as an evolution? I mean, is there any proposal or idea that you may have in order to skip or reduce this kind of waste?
So indeed, I think there's two angles. Is one is obviously you want to the decision to use single use or multi-use. So that obviously is a big element. I think for me, there's a step before that to actually think about how many you really need. So that's to your point, right? So maybe there's some elements of trying to drive greater efficiency, maybe through the use of data or AI to actually say we don't need as many as we have in the past. That would be the ideal. So, reducing the whole concept from the very get-go. I think for multi-use, for me, I think that's a really good area to explore. I think the biggest challenge right now is in terms of having correct guidance to also look at how to then return those data loggers.
Reverse logistics is
So
the main challenge.
if you're using, a typical air express shipment to return your data loggers one by one, it's probably not the most sustainable solution either, right? The challenges of also collecting the data loggers and managing the whole return is extremely complex, and it's actually one that we've created a working group on to look into how can we provide some best practices and guidance on that. So what elements to consider to also think about, what is the most eco-friendly way to manage that from a sustainable angle. So yeah, I think there's several elements that you need to look into, and I think there's also the element of one size doesn't fit all. So again, it's a discussion about, sea or air, fine. Is it single or multi? It really depends. There's just so many criteria that you need to look into to help you drive that decision-making process.
Okay. And is this working group that you are discussing, is that
Mhm.
related to the PDA working group that?
No, it's actually primarily driven by HCI. So it's another initiative that we've been driving with working together with them to really look at return of data temperature loggers and how to drive that. We're in the beginning stages, but we're hoping to have at least a webinar coordinated in a few months' time to sort of launch the working group and really raise awareness and bring together the experts. So I think that's really important. Experts from multiple angles, right? Experts obviously from the data logger companies themselves, but experts also from a regulatory perspective. So to your point, what's the legal framework that we're dealing with? And then of course also the shippers themselves who want to make this happen and to understand, what are their requirements and what are their needs.
Yeah.
But it's all about that collaboration, right? It's bringing together the different stakeholders, bringing them together to the table, having open discussions about what are some of the problems and coming to some common guidelines and solutions that we want to propose.
Please invite me to this webinar. I will not miss it. I will not miss
Will
it.
do.
And there is also an impact in terms of the objective of the 2030 objective.
Hmm.
in terms of reducing the emissions, reduce waste, and how important that is based on your experience, because let's say you are in the other side of the coin. So
Hmm.
there are the pharma companies and the transport providers. How important do you think it is being aligned with those 2030 objectives for the pharma companies? And I would like to ask you also for the logistics providers, for those pharma companies. Is that really a value-driven conversation, or is just something that, okay, they have to say, but it's not really impacting their operations?
So I think it's a bit of both. So I think there's an element of compliance. So there are more and more regulations coming out. Europe is a good example where actually companies will need to be compliant. So the whole legal framework is extremely important. I think there is also, though, an element of companies making this part of their own DNA and their values and their mission, and connecting that to also, the values and missions that they have with regards to patient safety. So if you look at some of the figures that have been presented, like the World Economic Forum presented some figures where they actually said that the carbon emissions, if you look at the life sciences and healthcare industry, it represents 4.4% of the global emissions, and it's actually even higher than the automotive industry, right? So, I mean, for us, the automotive industry seems like the big one that's, causing
They are
maybe a lot
held.
of challenges, right? But actually, if you compare the carbon intensity of the life sciences industry, it's actually 55% higher. So there is definitely a lot of room for improvement. And I think obviously part of that is also logistics, and the role that we have to play. And I think the companies, recognize that. They recognize the need to adhere to, the increasingly stringent regulatory requirements. They recognize also the public opinion, which plays an important role, the patient's opinion, even the fact of their own employees. So I remember even having interviews with folks that I wanted to bring on board. And even if you're looking at young talent, it
Mhm.
becomes almost a hiring criteria. How important is this topic within your company? Am I joining the right company? So people tend to prefer those companies where actually there's a true mission that's being lived. They get a lot of pressure, of course, from their stakeholders, of course, as well, and their investors, which is always an important role. And then there's always sort of, a strategy that's connected to the financial aspect of it, right? So what are the risks, but what are also the benefits that, that need to be taken into account? So it's a quite complex equation. I think there's been a lot of talking, and now I think we're in sort of that critical time where, okay, can we now, put the words into action and really make it happen?
Now, I mean, from my own perspective, I really see that happening and having a real impact. First of
Right.
all, in terms of hiring, as you mentioned,
Yep.
I mean, I've hired few people that
Hmm.
wanted to join my company because they were aligned with the values that we are sharing.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's really great because
That's great.
then
Yeah,
you
yeah.
don't discuss about the bonuses and the extra payments and so on. Is they
And the
they are
motivation is there, right? So if
exactly, there is an
people are your
intrinsic
biggest
motivation.
asset, right? So if you have the right people, then and they're motivated, then you're setting yourself up for success, right? So yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
And second, in terms of investment, which is also an angle that you mentioned,
Yep.
um, we are a startup. I mean, Truecaller is
Of
raising
course.
money from investors, and there is some specific and dedicated funds which
Yep.
are only investing on a startup that has a different methodologies, but basically
Hmm.
they have a big impact or a positive impact for the society, for the
Hmm.
environment, for the emissions, and so on. So it also creates a room for making it to to bet for projects that
Yep.
maybe they are not only focusing on making the most money, the major money possible, but also making something which is really good and sustainable. So yeah,
Yeah, making an impact. So yeah, it's putting your money where your mouth is, as the saying goes, right? And I think indeed investors are hungry for opportunities to invest in companies who indeed, put sustainability at the top of their agenda. So So there's multiple reasons why to do it, right? But people are, the companies are still struggling to then actually drive it, and make it implement some of those measures, which I think is completely normal, right? But some of the innovation out there, some of the data also that can be used out there, I think is going to be really important to facilitate that transition.
Yeah. Nina, you know the name of the podcast. The podcast is named called Secrets.
Okay. Uh-oh.
And I would like you to share
Uh-huh.
with me and with the audience any secret, or well, it's not really a secret, it can be a
Then if
challenge.
I tell you, it won't be a secret anymore.
Exactly. So secrets cannot be shared.
Okay.
Let's frame it like the one of the major challenges that you have experienced
Okay.
in your
Yeah.
career, or that you see a new challenge coming in the future.
Okay.
Um, and if it's about a challenge that you have experienced in your career, how you overcome that challenge, or which
Hmm.
was the result of that challenge.
Okay. So I think maybe like kind of an aha moment that I had in my career, which was maybe kind of a wake up call. And I'm going to try to stay as neutral as this as possible because it is a real case, and I don't want to, place fingers on and play,
Say
blame on
up to
anybody.
the level that you can say.
Exactly. So I will say as much as I can say. But so it was more in the early days of my career, and it was around Christmas period where I received a message that a critical shipment of active containers had been sent to the U.S. It was a 2-to-8 shipment. Worth a lot of money in terms of, you can imagine the product value being sent by air freight end of the year. So everybody's trying to clear off their stock. And the shipment was sent to the northern part of the U.S. And there was short of staff Christmas period, so everybody was enjoying their holidays. And the shipment was left outside. So the containers were left outside because we did some investigation, but basically what ended up happening is that they were short of staff, and the staff that was there that day had not been sufficiently trained. And they said, well, it's a cold shipment. It's a cold day, snow on the ground. It was end of the year, northern hemisphere. So they said, why put these containers anywhere else? Why put them and bring them inside? Let's just leave them outside. It's nice and cold out there. So with all the good intentions in mind, I then received the message saying we have a problem because the shipment has frozen. So if you know 2-to-8 shipments well enough, you'll realize that products such as vaccines or insulin or blood plasma, when they freeze, they basically lose all their potency. So they don't become dangerous for the patient, but basically they can become completely ineffective. So you will then inject yourself with a vaccine, thinking that you protect yourself, or that inject yourself with insulin, thinking that you're helping yourself, but actually it's not. So it was one of those moments where, you really had end of the year, Christmas season, and you said, this is not the gift that I had hoped for. But, indeed, it was dramatic because we obviously, the customer was, of course, extremely upset about this for all the right reasons. And our role was then to say, okay, well, we need to investigate and truly dig deep into why, using the 5 whys, trying to, understand why could something like this go wrong. And it really boiled down to people, with all the best intentions, people not having been trained and just not understanding the criticality of their actions, and just thinking they were doing the best and actually realizing that actually it caused, a multi-million-dollar damage. So that was for me really one of those moments where I realized that everybody in the supply chain plays a key role. And just because, you think you've given the right instructions doesn't mean everybody in the supply chain is fully understood. And we were very lucky that the relationship with the customer was extremely strong. To the point actually where they said, we'd like you to welcome you to our facility, and we actually visited the customer's facility. Truly for them to say, we want you to understand why you're doing all of this, and why these shipments are so important, and why they're temperature sensitive, and what happens when they freeze. So it was, very much one of those moments where everybody kind of came together. And instead of, simply just firing bullets at each other, we kind of said, okay, we have a problem. How do we jointly address it and make sure that this is a lesson learned and is not ever repeated again? So I think indeed, the improvement measures that were driven afterwards were really important and effective, and definitely changed the way people saw things, in a new way.
Very good. Very interesting. And as a takeaway, we can say that your supply chain is as weak as the weakest point of the chain itself.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. No, that's a very good point. Indeed. Yes, fully agree with you.
All right, we are reaching up to the end of the conversation. It has been a great pleasure, Nina.
Thank
Hope
you,
that
Miguel.
you enjoy and
I
join us
did.
in future occasions. As a recap, I would like to share. I took a few notes.
Yeah.
There is no one single solution that can fit them all.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning there are specific use cases, and we can adapt to those use cases to make the better choice. So one solution doesn't fit all.
Mm-hmm.
Second would be starting with IATA labeling in terms of analogic data sharing as a standard framework. How important is the collaboration in terms of data between all the different stakeholders? Um, and basically, it's not only about data collaboration, but the collaboration itself. Taking as an example the example that you just explained about the collaboration between the pharma manufacturer, the logistics companies, and how having a good relationship and trust between each other can engage and make the more efficient supply chain.
And if I could add one more, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
sure.
I think for me, it's continue to learn every day, right? So always be open-minded, listen and learn. And as they say, we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So it's important that we listen more than we speak. I continue to learn every day, and I really enjoy that. It helps me grow and helps everybody innovate. So I think being curious is extremely important, and only that will help us, to continue to think outside of the box and continue to evolve and to innovate.
Re-challenge things, absolutely. Thank you, Nina.
Thank you,
Have a
Miguel.
great day and talk to
You
you
too.
soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.